specifically about how Irish English as a variety is being used in the local EFL context, okay? And it's how teachers are using Irish English, if at all, in their interactions with learners. So when we talk about target models, we can differentiate between explicit target models and implicit. So explicit, the varieties of English that form the target models that are being taught to learners in the curriculum, from the course books, on the cassettes, or we can talk about the implicit models, which is what the teacher is using in teacher talk throughout the lesson, that learners, I suppose, subconsciously, the input's coming in a more subconscious way. So I'm going to talk about some research that was done with intermediate level EFL learners, and it was a corpus project whereby recordings were made of classrooms and the language was analysed with a specific focus on teacher talk, the interactional language of the teacher with students, and the varieties that were being used. Was it mainly standard British English? Was it Irish English? If it was Irish English, which features were being manifested and why? Looking at the pedagogical implications of that. Okay, so the teachers were 20 EFL teachers at different stages of their professional career. So some were novices, some had few years experience, and some were much more experienced teachers. And as I say, the linguistic focus was on Irish English. So for example, items like ye. So is ye being used rather than you, or are both being used? And if so, how? Are they being used strategically or in a more sort of subconscious way where there's less control of them? So what do we see there in terms of which teachers are using these features as well? And verb constructions like the after perfect. So the Irish English after perfect, I'm after doing this, instead of the present perfect, for example. So even though there's been a lot of discussion about target models, there's been very little empirical research as to what teachers are actually doing at the chalk face. So I suppose this was an attempt to address that in some way. The study also looked at, explored teachers' attitudes to different varieties and correlations between what they thought about different varieties and what they did in practice to see if there was a relationship between the two. And that actually came across quite strongly. So it's important, I suppose, to contextualise the research in that it's taking place at a time when the existing historic Anglo-American target English approach is being challenged increasingly on both ideological grounds, as new sets of questions have emerged around the ownership of English, more non-native speaker use than native speaker use, and also linguistic grounds in terms of the wealth of insights provided by corpus linguistics. What are we teaching? What is the relevance of what we're teaching, in terms of the authenticity of the language? So against that background, okay, so in relation to the importance of the varieties, so the work of Steve Walsh and Young has indicated that the variety of English which is taught lies at the very heart of the what of English language teaching, whether it's in an English as a second language or as a foreign language classroom. So this very much relates to the explicit target model, so in the curriculum, the variety, and we know that historically it's been a British English focus, standard British English at that, not regional varieties, and an American English focus. But what about what's going on in terms of the interaction between the teacher and the student? So, have we seen a change? Are we seeing a change in the varieties that are being taught and tested in the EFL curriculum and in the exam system? So we know that some change is taking place, but it's very, very slow. And there's been research that's looked at why. Why is it so slow? What are the reasons for the lack of progress? And, I suppose many factors are involved in that. And then looking at explicitly what teachers are doing in terms of their talk. Okay? And so to what extent then are changing trends and perspectives impacting on EFL pedagogy? And where are teachers in all of this? So teachers are main stakeholders in the ELT world. What teachers do, what teachers think is important. We know that teacher talk plays a central role in the second language acquisition process, and that's increasingly recognised. Critical linguists have also stressed the importance of teachers developing multi-dialectal competencies, that we are able to use different varieties and to use them competently, and to be able to have a targeted use across varieties. So, that's appropriate to different contexts and settings, not just to different EFL proficiency levels, but to different learner groups and their needs. The practices and beliefs of EFL teachers from Ireland. So Ireland is a unique case in many ways because it's an inner circle variety, Irish English, an inner circle variety, so a native speaker variety, but it's been on the periphery, and it's been a variety which, just like non-native speaker varieties, has been excluded on ideological grounds, perceived as non-standard and inferior in terms of prestige. Okay, so just some key findings, because I know we don't have very much. So I thought we'd focus very much on the U and the Ye. So both Standard English U and Irish English Ye were visible in the classroom data. So yes, Irish English is being used in the local classroom context, and it's being used quite a lot. In overall terms, Standard British English U was used more than Irish English Irish English Ye. And I suppose here we need to take into account the U that's being used, the Standard British U, will be both for the singular and the plural, but the Irish English Ye marks plurality. So that will affect frequencies, for example. We also noticed that Irish English Ye was used significantly more by younger teachers. So age was a key factor. And also the novices were more likely to use Ye than the experienced teachers. But that didn't mean that all of the experienced weren't using it. Some of the experienced teachers were using Ye. But again, it was more likely to be the younger teachers. When we looked, I suppose, in a more qualitative way at how Ye was being used, it was found to serve a very useful interaction role in this discourse context. You know, in terms of the classroom management aspects, in terms of questioning strategies, things like that, because it marks plurality. In terms of the two structures that I'm highlighting, Ye was used significantly more than the after perfect. So Ye would have a much higher communicative value in the EFL classroom than the after perfect. So here are some examples of how it was found to be used. So it was used in different classroom modes and when different pedagogic functions being performed. And I refer here to the set model that Mary talked about earlier on. So it was occurring in materials mode, management mode, context mode, and when grammar and vocabulary pronunciation being taught. It occurred in directives, instructions. I'd like Ye to look at this exercise, clearly talking to the whole class. Progress checks, have you had enough time? Often that was for a pair of students, this teacher going over to the pair. Different types of questions, elicitation, what did Ye do at the weekend? Context mode. Interesting is it was used less in systems mode. So systems is where the teacher is overtly teaching the grammar. So is that a subconscious shift away from Ye? Because we're now teaching the grammar which is standard English grammar, which is in the book. So that was something that was quite interesting. Just a few examples of the after perfect. Very few far less frequent use of the after perfect. Where it did occur, we see it in examples like this, kind of a scolding function. A student arriving late, you're late, we're after starting, so quickly take a seat. And the hot news function, I'm just after getting a new apartment, and this is a teacher actually talking to the students, telling them about their new apartment. But we can see that it's not really playing the same communicative role as Ye. This is fairly peripheral. So what does all this mean? So Irish English is visible in teacher talk to varying degrees. Some Irish English forms play a more valuable communicative role than others in this discourse context. So are teachers consciously using Irish English? Is it something that's that's reflecting their ideologies, their beliefs, or is it something they do because they haven't yet perhaps learned the norms, or to be able to use their language in a more targeted way? So when we explored the classroom data and I suppose correlated it with the attitudinal data, we found that the more targeted use of the Irish English by the experienced teachers was because they had higher levels of language awareness and they were better able to control their language use. Some of them had more prescriptive use of language use than others. So some of them held to the need for a standard, others were more open to the use of Irish English. I suppose some of the questions that arise then, does it impede intelligibility? So when we explored that aspect, Ye doesn't really affect intelligibility. In fact, it gives the interaction greater clarity because students, if they're overtly made aware of Ye, they know who is being addressed when the teacher's asking the question and things like that. But that brings us to that question then, are teachers overtly signalling the use of Irish English to their students? So if we are using Irish English, are we doing it? Are we bringing the students with us? Are we highlighting it and explaining as we go? And if not, perhaps we should be. So parallel language attitudes research has indicated that teachers hold strong views. So, teachers tend to have either a view that they would support the use of Irish English or the other way. Although increasingly, I suppose, teachers are also expressing confusion and uncertainty about where are we at the moment? What is allowed? What can we do? What should we do? But that there is a close relationship between what they believe in terms of the language ideologies and what they do in practice. So I thought it might be a chance to ask you your views as to, as practitioners, which varieties do you use in your teacher talk? So this would be the implicit models now, rather than, the course book, what you're teaching overtly. And do you feel that you have strong language views? And is that impacting on your practices? Do you think your views might be changing because of the changing international English landscape? The shift towards world Englishes and the fact that, local varieties are being validated much more and appreciated much more. What do you think the influences are on this? So I've mentioned a few. What do you think are the obstacles? So perhaps you'd like to use Irish English more, but you feel there are obstacles, practical obstacles. What are they? And this search, the elusive search for an alternative model or models, where are we there? Okay, so over to you. Any views or any questions? So maybe I'll get a hand count. So hands up who actually overtly uses Irish English with their students, and it's something you want to promote. So tell us why you do that. And is it knowingly that it's a conscious decision?
I'm Canadian, so yeah.
Oh, okay. So you teach Irish English, okay.
Yeah, well, I feel like I have to because I teach on the north side of Dublin, so they always come in with questions about pronunciation or certain other issues. I'm after is one of the ones that I had to teach the other day.
Oh, so they actually asked you about that. But
yeah.
Would you use? I suppose in your case you're not an Irish English user, but you're making. I suppose it's becoming part of your curriculum then, in the sense that you're explicitly teaching perhaps items that they are showing curiosity about.
Yeah.
So you wouldn't exclude it. So that's very interesting. So it's kind of student-led there in your case. What about yourself, Ethel? You had your hand up.
Yeah,
do you overtly teach?
I'd have to explain ye.
Yeah.
And they'd often go, isn't that American English? Or is that English English? Or is that, I would say, oh no, that's typical Irish.
Yeah. So it's nice, isn't it, to have that discussion with students about varieties. But I suppose we need to bear in mind the level of proficiency and what students can cope with at certain levels.
Yeah.
But to open up the classroom to that kind of more critical pedagogy, which is what we're being encouraged to do more, that we discuss the status quo and we say, well, are we happy with that? And do we have any power to change it? So what agency do teachers have? And, so those sort of questions are very much coming to the fore at the moment, aren't they?